Welcome to the Autodesk LinkedIn Live session, Building Better Buildings, How the UK and the Netherlands Built Environment are Preparing for Change. My name is Amanda Fennell. I'm Director of Marketing for Autodesk Construction Solutions, EMEA. I'm based in Dublin, Ireland. Today we'll be diving into the topics of managing change across the built environment. As you may be aware, laws, regulations and legislation dictate much of what happens in the built environment. And today, government bodies across the globe are constantly seeking to improve the way construction operates by developing new ways of working, from improving safety to reducing the environmental impact construction has on the world around us. Embedding new requirements and ways of working can be challenging. In this session, we'll be focusing on how the UK's Building Safety Act and the Netherlands Building Quality Assurance Act are changing ways of working for the construction industry, and looking at how firms can prepare. If you have any questions, please add them in the comments and we'll try to answer them at the end of the session. I'm joined by my colleague Ben de Swaef and Steve Salmon from Autodesk partner PointFuse. So let's kick off with introductions from both speakers. Ben, would you like to introduce yourself to our audience, please?
Yeah, good afternoon, Amanda. To introduce myself, like Amanda said, my name is Ben de Swaef. I've been with Autodesk for 4 years, and I'm responsible for Autodesk Construction Cloud specifically for the strategic segment in the Benelux market. So in my role, I support companies in their company can gain operational efficiency and become more data-driven in order to achieve their business goals.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ben. So, Steve, handing over to you now for a short introduction.
Thanks, Amanda. Hi, I'm Steve Salmon. I'm the Chief Executive of PointFuse. PointFuse is a unique piece of meshing software. We automatically analyze the geometry generated from scanner technology and prepare that data for user classification. So we, in essence, convert point clouds into objects for your downstream workflows.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you both. So now we're going to get to the main part of the LinkedIn session. I've got some questions posed to Steve and Ben, and as I said earlier, I would encourage you to add some questions, which we'll get to at the end of the session in an open Q&A. Steve, I'm going to ask you a few questions first. The first one I have for you is the golden thread of information that's talked about a lot in relation to the Building Safety Act. Specifically in the UK. Can you tell us a little bit more about what this means?
Sure. Let me just put it into context. I mean, the UK started with BIM back in 2008. Its entire goal was to create a framework for construction companies to build better buildings. Frankly, since 2008, it's been poorly adopted in anything other than the world of design. And what we're now seeing in the real estate market is what I would describe a perfect storm. We've got forthcoming legislation. You touched on the Building Safety Act, but we've also got changes in building regs. We've got embodied carbon regulations and the removal of fossil fuels all hitting in the 2025 period. And we're also seeing escalating energy costs across the globe now with energy prices going up. Just to put that into context, the UK in 2021 spent about 40 billion in energy costs, heating and ventilating buildings. That's estimated to be 140 billion this year. And that's no increase in energy utilization. It's merely a reflection of the escalating prices. So we're now seeing both commercial and also legislative reasons why real estate owners and builders and modifiers need to adopt a different strategy to the way that they execute their building management. And that's really the essence of the golden thread. You can't make informed decisions unless you've got current information. And what the Building Safety Act does in terms of high-rise residential is it provides a framework not only for new construction, but also for existing buildings so that tenants and owner-occupiers can actually be more involved in making the buildings in which they live safer. And there are some very strong commercial reasons why real estate owners and constructors need to adopt this paradigm. You'll see insurance premiums going through the roof in terms of buildings that aren't considered to be safe. Contractor liability insurance has now been extended to 15 years. So if you are a contractor, a GC, looking to either build a new building or modify a building, you best be sure that you know what the state of that building was when you hand it over, because frankly, some surveyor is going to come along in a few years' time and say, you didn't actually build it to specifications. So there are some very pervasive and compelling reasons why all people in the value chain should be looking to adopt the golden thread. As I say, it really is a perfect storm. Legislative, but also we can't continue to build buildings the way we have done historically. We have to adopt a more modular approach. We need to look at how we can remove fossil fuel-based heating and ventilation systems from our buildings. And in fact, that's one of the key bedrocks of the forthcoming building regs in the UK. We need to adapt our buildings for escalating climate change. The climate is getting hotter. The fabrics of buildings are contributing to buildings being hotter. So how can we actually change the way buildings are constructed? How can we improve heat retention and also keep our buildings cooler? How can we actually develop smarter buildings? Again, that all leads to this whole theme of the golden thread. We can't make decisions about how to modify our buildings until we actually know what we've got.
So that's great. I mean, that just clearly shows how, these things will impact all of us, consumers and people working in construction, supporting those who provide the construction industry. Thanks for that. So Steve, the next question I have for you is, the construction industry is going to be required to capture and manage data digitally. So, how ready are firms to do this in the construction industry?
Well, I think if I take the experience since 2008, I would say that they're not very ready at all, frankly. We need a common data environment. We need a means by which as-built conditions can be both captured and also utilized in a format that is easy to understand. I mean, I use Google Street View as an analogy. A point cloud is something that's incredibly difficult to understand, even from the trained eye, let alone to share across interested parties. So we need to find a means by which this as-built condition information can be put into a format that can actually be shared. And that's our mission in life. That's PointFuse mission in life, is actually to remove the need to model everything. How can we actually quickly capture this information and utilize this information in a common data environment into Autodesk Construction Cloud, into Unity or into Twinmotion, whatever software platform you use. But then also, how do we tie that into companies' asset databases? Every company out there pretty well knows what they've got. They probably don't know where it is or how to service it, or when are the service intervals. So actually providing a means by which construction companies and real estate owners can actually have a database, a highly visual database of what's actually there, so they can then make these informed decisions, is really the only way construction companies and real estate owners can actually deliver on this golden thread. But I would point out that most contracts, most remodeling, most new build contracts do not actually specifically provide for capturing reality. Every BIM manager out there is empowered to do things quickly and do things on budget. They're not necessarily empowered to go out and scan progress. And we see in the construction industry, historically, 17.5% of contract costs is incurred in unforeseen errors. It isn't as if people go out there and deliberately make mistakes. Things change. Construction sites are very complicated. You've got a whole raft of trades all trying to do their bit in a very confined space. So again, adopting this reality capture technology, making it an embodied part of your decision making, is really how construction companies and owners will get a better solution than we have historically got.
Brilliant, great, thanks. It's plenty of food for thought there. And I guess, there's kind of a follow-on question in terms of, for those companies who may be at kind of an earlier stage in their digital transformation journey, what sort of advice, based on your experience, what you've seen out there, what sort of advice would you give to them in terms of where best to start?
Start at the end and work back. Understand actually what you need, what information do you need to answer the questions that you're asking. And once you know that, then that all cascades back to what process you need to implement. There's lots of scanner technology out there. There's even iPhone technology now that will enable you to capture as-built conditions. So actually understanding the answers you're seeking to answer, the questions you're seeking to answer, is the critical part to actually understand what information systems and what data capture you need to answer those questions. So fundamentally, start small, but know the answers, know the questions you need to ask first.
I like that. Start at the end. Good one. Okay, so thank you, Steve. We're going to move now from the UK to the situation in the Netherlands with the Building Quality Assurance Act. Thanks, Ben, for waiting patiently. So with regard to the Building Quality Assurance Act, it'd be interesting, Ben, just to understand what are some of the key aims of the Act in the Netherlands, and, why is it so important for the Dutch built environment?
Yeah, so first of all, the Building Quality Assurance Act will radically change the building system regulations for the Dutch built environment. So the new legislation will impact many stakeholders, also outside of construction. But so first of all, of course, construction companies, but also municipalities, public safety organizations, building owners, consumers, and also insurance. But one of the key aims, well, to produce better quality buildings with fewer issues, especially when it comes to delivering the much needed housing supply in the Netherlands. It also aims to put the Dutch consumer in a much clearer position when it comes to responsibilities and liabilities that have to do with issues in your home. And an overarching aim of the bill is also to unite the supply chain to deliver better outcomes on construction projects, because the new changes will go further than quality and safety alone. These regulations will transform the way construction is approached. There will be a requirement for a shared thread of information, and that needs to be captured from planning right throughout execution. So this means data will become available to more construction partners, which is also a great opportunity for the industry to being able to leverage that data and to make better decisions.
Great, thanks for that. So you did just mention one or two opportunities. So, the next question I had is kind of what are the benefits and the opportunities of the Building Quality Assurance Act? If there's anything further you can elaborate on there, in terms of, with some of the customers that you deal with day to day.
Yeah, of course. Well, first, it's critical that every construction stakeholder understands the changes ahead, prepared. Initially will only apply to simple structures such as single family houses and small offices, but it will be extended to all structures by 2025. And so the changes will impact everyone in the industry in some way. So for many construction companies, the Quality Assurance Act will be a catalyst to change and optimize their processes, because the industry has a chance to do better. They need to rethink the way they're currently working. So I already said a far greater level of information sharing and transparency will be required across the industry. And this will unify the supply chain and lead to better collaboration, which will lead to greater efficiency and time savings. And also with a good data strategy, less time will be spent in searching for project information and managing communications. There will also be fewer errors and defects on delivery, because defects will be proactively checked and resolved during the construction phase. So by introducing more efficient working, there's no doubt we'll build a safer and stronger industry. We have a chance now to evaluate how we work today and establish new best practices in construction, creating an industry that will deliver better outcomes for society in the Netherlands overall.
Brilliant, thank you. And Ben, your voice is staying strong. Occasionally, your visual freezes, but we're hearing what you're saying. So thank you for that.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, good.
So we're going to give you a little break, and I've got a question for Steve. So one of the comments, one of the questions we have from delegates, and again, I'd encourage people just to pitch through some questions for the audience, for the panel. So one comment from an attendee for you, Steve, is that it sounds like the problem is the reality, not the capturing of it. If the industry moved from projects to products, sites would be much less messy. So do you have any comments on that?
I think I touched on it earlier. A bricklayer can only lay so many bricks in a day. You're not going to make a bricklayer any more efficient. And a lot of the problems on construction sites is actually trying to schedule the trades. And inevitably in any design, contingencies put in place in terms of both time and also space. I mean, we worked on a project in New York where the 5 floors for MEP were designed, and then there was a change in tenant infit, and then suddenly they're having to cannibalize lettable area because they just don't have a space in the MEP area. I think the fundamental answer to the question really involves an environment. It's more of an environmental question actually than a construction sites being messy. If we don't move to a more modular construction approach, then we're not going to be able to reutilize scarce resource. At the moment, if you demolish a building, then the best you can hope to do is to grind up the glass and the stone, and you may be able to reuse the steels. But if we go to a modular approach, then there's no reason why you can't actually remove that component and rehouse it somewhere else. And I think that's one of the biggest advantages from an environmental point of view. But from a construction point of view, it brings with it its own challenges. You take a corn shell construction, for instance. Most of the cost involved in a offsite manufactured modular item is the cost of actually getting it to site and erecting it into place. If something's changed on site in terms of access or in terms of the way the fabric has been created, maybe the dry risers have been moved, whatever. If you only find that out when it's been put into place, then suddenly all of the benefits of offsite construction have been dissipated. So strangely enough, it actually drives to more reality capture on site to get these benefits of both environmental and also efficiency savings of offsite construction. But I fundamentally agree, offsite construction manufacturing process is the way the construction industry has to go.
Great, thanks for that. Okay, I have a question for both Ben and Steve. So let's try Ben first to answer this one. So we know the industry is already facing a challenging skills shortage when it comes to construction. Will the requirements of the legislation exacerbate that further in terms of needing to find individuals with a high degree of skill to interpret the data? Ben, are you happy to take that one first?
Sure, I can give a comment on that. It's also, so to interpret the data, well, there will be more data available. That is true, but there will also be available to make the data more simpler to read. So it's the tools that enable data insight. So that they need to be very selective in the tools that you use to capture that data and how it's structured, and then have tools that make the data simple and insightful, so that you don't necessarily need a data scientist in order to make the data useful that you have available. So that's my comment on that.
And I guess it gives the opportunity to bring people into the industry who maybe previously didn't consider construction as an option for them. So cool, thanks for that. And Steve, do you want to add your opinion on that point?
Well, yes, because that's entirely my mission in life. The reality is that the technology is exacerbating the problem. You've now got scanners that are capturing millions of points a second. And consequently, the data sizes and the data complexity is more acute than it was 5-10 years ago. And to try to interpret a point cloud is somewhat problematic. And PointFuse's role in life is to simplify that. I used the analogy earlier, the Google Street View of point clouds. We convert point clouds into solid objects, into meshed objects, 3D objects, which, as Ben said earlier, if you can actually simplify the data, make it easier to read and review, and take out the interpretation of that data, then actually the skill levels can be reduced. An accomplished point cloud reviewer or Revit modeler would need to determine which points actually approximate the corner of a room. If you use technologies like ours, then actually all of that hard work's done for you. We actually mathematically identify the corners in the room, or which points are a pipe and which points are a wall. So I think the Building Safety Act is going to increase the skill requirements more in terms of supervision and management, rather than necessarily the interpretation of the data, providing one is able to facilitate a common data environment and, as Ben said, simplify that data.
Sounds good. There's a follow-on question here, which again is for you, Steve, but I guess, Ben, when, if there's anything you can link it to the Building Quality Assurance Act, that would be useful to get your feedback as well. But we'll give it to Steve first, because he's got the better audio as well at the moment. So do you believe that the Building Safety Act has the potential to change how we design, build and operate buildings for good?
I hope to God it does. Nobody wants a repeat of Grenfell, frankly. And, there were a lot. The Building Safety Act wouldn't have changed the Grenfell outcome, but it may actually have created a framework by which it could have been prevented. We are going to see increasingly, particularly in terms of existing buildings, and bearing in mind that's the bulk of, there are more buildings exist today than are ever going to be built in my lifetime. And they, if you take the UK and mainland Europe, they go back to the 1800s, where building standards were entirely different to what they are today. But there will be a drive to make buildings more energy efficient, to make them safer. And what the Building Safety Act does for high-rise residential, and inevitably that will bleed into commercial buildings, offices, hospitals, etc., it will provide a framework by which building changes will be safer. There will be a drive to ensure that fire safety procedures are updated, that we know how to evacuate buildings. The fire brigade actually know what is the best advice in terms of evacuating people from a burning building, that we actually know what the fabric of the building is when we clad it, or we change the windows to make them more heat retaining. So yes, I think the Building Safety Act will have a fundamental effect upon existing buildings and will inevitably change the way we construct in the future.
And I think isn't part of it as well that if a decision is made to put a particular feature in, that's signed off and we know who made that decision and why, so that if in the case, hopefully not, of a disaster, not the authority, we can work out who had the authority or a parent authority to put that in place.
Can you imagine an engineer at BMW changing the wheel bearings on a Mini without actually getting authority or actually sign off to it? It's an absolute nonsense that in the construction industry we make changes without actually being cognizant of the impact of the changes that we're making. And it's been said so many times in the past, the construction industry, the real estate industry needs to adopt the paradigms of manufacturing and production, because that is a very efficient methodology that could so easily be applied across the industry in which we all work. But what we do need is we need a means by which we can capture information and share information to make better decisions. Yeah,
okay. And Ben, I know that, for example, in the Netherlands, there's very much kind of circular economy and buildings passports, and it feels like there's already steps in place. Was there anything that you wanted to add just in terms of how legislation has the potential to change how we design, build and operate buildings?
Yeah, well, it will definitely also change how we design, build, operate buildings. radically, because there will be new and other responsibilities for all the stakeholders as well. And so the construction industry will need to collaborate more better. They need to capture data also centrally, so they can also have that traceability, because there will be independent quality assurance officers coming to check if projects meet the requirements of the Quality Assurance Act. And if they don't meet the requirements, then they can shut down the project. So they're actually forced to change the way they currently are working, but for the better, because it's not only for quality but also for safety, so that they're more periodically check if they meet the right safety requirements. So it will benefit everybody in the end, but we need to change the way we're working today.
Brilliant. Thank you both. I have a question here for both of you again. We'll let Steve go first. Who is ultimately responsible for the ongoing management / maintenance of information and data, and who should pay for it? So it'd be good to get the opinion from both of you.
Well, under the Building Safety Act, the building owner is ultimately responsible for ensuring that buildings are safe, and there is a maintenance of the golden thread. We're not very good at spending money to save money in the UK. But what I would say is that the real estate industry is changing in terms of the value dynamics. There will be a drive towards safer buildings being attracting higher rent, because tenants will be more inclined to want to live in a building that's safe rather than one that it may be safe but nobody actually knows it's safe. Insurance premiums will be lower in safer buildings, and more energy efficient buildings will be have a higher value. So I think there are some very strong commercial imperatives in terms of maintaining this golden thread of information. But the legislation is quite clear. The owner is responsible for both capturing and maintaining that golden thread of information. And you won't get your fire safety certificate after you've made changes, or a license to occupy, unless you've actually got that information. It's still unclear how that information needs to be shared with the various authorities. They say it has to be digital. I've not come across a planning authority yet that accepts anything other than 2D drawings and side views, etc. So be interested to see how the authorities actually move forward to this whole digital paradigm. But it's the responsibility is very much for the owner.
So yeah, and it requires a shift from a few different players as well, obviously, from what you said there. Ben, was there anything you wanted to add on that in terms of who's ultimately responsible for ongoing maintenance management?
Because it's different for in the Netherlands for the Quality Assurance Act. It's there's actually the responsibility of the main contractor. They need to understand the risks and the measures needed for a successful compliance to the new system on any given project. But those contractors will also pass on those extra responsibilities to their subcontractors and to their supply chain. So the subcontractors also have an increased liability. And this may drive change in how they set contracts, how they draw up contracts. And also all the supply chain partners will be expected to improve also their internal quality controls to meet those additional requirements. And it's also very important that the subcontractors can also can provide good evidence that their workforce is properly skilled to deliver on a project, and that all the work is completed and compliant. Because otherwise, if they can't demonstrate that, they might miss out on work on new projects.
Brilliant, thank you. So we're just coming up in 30 minutes, so we'll kind of move to wrap up shortly. And I guess in closing, before I kind of do the final wrap up, it would be good just to get from each of you just some key takeaways. Steve, are there any key takeaways that you have to share with the audience based on the theme, the safety, the building better buildings, and the Building Safety Act?
Yeah, I think we need to become proactive rather than reactive. I I think a lot of the points that Ben made in his last view are very pertinent in the UK market as well. So I think that, as I said earlier, that there's a perfect storm hitting the real estate industry in terms of both existing and also new construction. And the companies and the owners that embrace this change are the ones who will be the winners. And it won't just be residential and commercial buildings. It'll be manufacturing sites. It will be production sites, distribution sites. It will be all real estate across the whole gambit. And what we find globally is that a lot of companies, the US is a good example, don't adopt legislation, they adopt best practice. But they do look at legislation in other countries. And BIM's a good example of that. You know, the UK mandated BIM back in 2012, but there's no such legislation in the US. It's still been best practice, but it has been adopted as far as, you know, I touched on earlier. So I think proactive rather than reactive would be my key takeaway.
Cool. And Ben, anything for you in terms of key takeaways for construction firms embarking on their change journey?
Well, I think it was a good point. It's better to start preparing today than tomorrow, although the act will only be effective half of 2023. Is best to start today, because there will be some change management that comes with it. So better start today than tomorrow, because they need a new approach for project information to manage their project information, and technology will play a key role in that. The main contractors will get more responsibilities, but they also need to set their expectations to the supply chain. So the mindset needs to change within the construction industry and within the construction people. But I do believe it's a chance for a better future. It will bring big change and improvement for the quality of the buildings, but also on for sustainability as well.
Brilliant, thank you. And I guess, you know, ultimately it's building a better world for all of us, you know, better, safer world. And yeah, that can only be a good thing. Brilliant. Ben and Steve, thank you so much for your input and for your response to the questions. Thanks to the audience for joining us today. We're very grateful for your support and also for the questions. It's always good to get those live requests and comments to keep the panelists on their toes. And just as a heads up, we're planning to host similar sessions, hopefully monthly. And one of the things would be great to do is, you know, please send us any suggestions you have for future topics. Also, please share the details with any colleagues or contacts who may be interested. And any feedback you have, please share with us. We'd love to hear your thoughts. So with that, I will say goodbye and thank you. We look forward to seeing you again in the future. Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you, Amanda. Bye, Steve. And bye, everyone who was watching and listening.